Wake, be super happy because after that lovely, great meal, I don't know how you're going to do it, but um, I'm going to begin with a disclaimer. I'm about to handle. These guys are complaining that the big chunk Eric gave us. Well, I gave myself the biggest chunk. Oh, really? It's 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 antenna error. It's just not tight enough. Anyway, with that being said, let's just pray, and I'll just go through all this as we do this. Father God, we again graciously come before you. We love this wonderful word you gave us. And as we dissect verse by verse and chapter by chapter and find all these nuances, we've learned so much, Father. And there's so much more in these hills of your word to glean even more information. And Father, I thank you for the ears to listen that have attended this conference and the work these guys have put in. I'm looking forward to Mike's last class after me. And Father, I just love the fact that Luther loves to dig into the word. In Jesus' name, amen. So here's what I'm going to do and trying to accomplish. First of all, if you've noticed, references. Some have only gone to Genesis 11. And below me, I have a bunch of books that Drew Freeman has given me that I would give out at some point in this conference. It's his commentary on Genesis 1 through 11. We're going to 12 because I think without 12, it makes no sense to give this to the children of Israel. The children of Israel were the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So we're going to tackle that tomorrow. Here's what I think of Genesis 6 through 9 in a nutshell. Don't mess with God, he judges. So when Israel came out of Egypt, they saw the judgment that God had given to Egypt. And now here we're going back to the very, when we talk about the fall, it was a judgment, but it wasn't very visual. God said to Adam and Eve, if you eat from the fruit of the tree, you'll die to deaths, many deaths kind of thing. You'll certainly die dead kind of idea. But nobody saw that for 900 plus years. Now, I don't know about you. Let's just talk about that framework, 900 years. Okay, it's 2023, the last I checked, yes? 1923 was a horrible time in America. We're in war, we're ending World War I. We have the Great Depression coming up. There's Bonnie and Clyde. There's now, since we know about the Osage murders, those things are happening. And at that point, the car didn't go very fast, kind of thing. Now we got cars that are battery operated and can go, have super amount of horsepower. But go back for a minute, 1,000 years. What was happening in 1023? And you were alive in 1023, and now you're alive in 2023. You realize how much of history you've seen and how many changes you've seen? So when we deal with these Bible characters, and some of them really are characters, they have seen a lot of change in humanity. Obviously, they didn't discover the wheel yet, kind of idea, which they had. But they didn't come through the discoveries. They didn't have the industrial age and all those things at that time, but they were very well equipped at that time for what they did. So I want to bring that forth that you need to. So when we look now at the flood, because that's what we're going to deal with, this catastrophe, God set a pattern in Eden by saying, if you do this, this is what I'm going to do. And he carried out judgment. And when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they saw exactly what God did in different plagues. But Moses is now going back to Genesis and said, the stage has been set. And I think the Genesis account is a historical account that carries over to what Luther referred to in Revelation, which is also a historical account, a different type of judgment with the same impact. So that's kind of where we're going with this. So we're in Genesis 6. And another thing I'm telling you, I'm not going to get through every little nuance in these chapters. So I picked out things that I thought were very interesting to kind of set the stage. Because, again, we've said it I don't know how many times during this conference. Israel is getting this verbatim from Moses. And I always find that kind of interesting. Where did you come from? How'd you get here? And the last thing we're going to talk about on Sunday is covenants, because the nation needed a covenant. Luther in his first class this morning did a really good job stating what a nation needed. Okay, they needed the ordinances, they needed a history, they need to know where they came from, and that's important. So when we look at this, so far we've looked at creation, the fall, and if you go to chapter 5, you can't find a whole lot of interest in there, right? Everybody died. I call chapter 5 of Genesis Tombstone Alley, because it seems like everybody died except one, and then Noah just goes into chapter 6. That's another thing we've got to tackle, and you need to know this. The Bible's full of what I call black holes. There's things you just don't know. How many sons and daughters did these guys have? Well, if you began propagating children, let's say 30, and you live to 900, just think that through. And we're not told about everything because it's not pertinent to the story, or the narrative, I should say, that Israel needs to get. Do I keep cutting out up there, or is it fine? Okay. Because I keep hearing like this. So ignore it. And I think it's, as we look at this, we're going to find out certain things are just left out. It's not part of the story. So here's a disclaimer number 1 or 2 or whatever. Noah had 3 sons. And some of you grew up with the show on TV, My 3 Sons. Noah didn't have just 3 sons. I can't prove that or disprove it. But if Noah lived 300 years and then begot these 3 guys, what was he doing for 300 years? Did he have too much TV? So we're not told everything. And what we're told within the case of Noah is who responded to God's grace. And I think that's the important part. Even though we all, from the time of the fall, always have a sin disposition. And we're going to see that raise its ugly head in Genesis chapter 6. And I think that's super important as we go through this. But chapter 6 kind of opens, I want you to get a little bit of a backdrop before we go into any of the material here. Begins with dead men walking. What happened is man fell, and then man begot more men, and all those men were fallen men. They had a sin nature, and they were dead until they became alive in God, and most of them just stayed dead in their trespass and sins. And God's interesting, because when he has Moses give this narrative out, he doesn't go through everybody's sin and what everybody did, because it was awful. He just gives a statement on everybody's sin, and we'll look at that momentarily. But what I want to pick up is chapter 5. I know Luther just got finished with it, but since I didn't have enough with 3 chapters, I figured I'd back up a little bit. And I find it fascinating, because after Enoch walked with God and was not, and God took him, and I kind of visualized that because I've got a different sense of humor. I figured God was walking, hanging out with Enoch, and all of a sudden he just kept walking right into heaven. And I go, whoa, that's kind of an interesting trip. And we don't know much about that other than the word says, and we know Enoch never physically died because of his relationship. But that set the stage for a lot of things that's going to happen in history. For instance, we can get a kind of a little vignette of what the rapture will be like. One day we'll be walking, and then we're with God. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing. But don't walk out of here and says that Enoch was the first rapture guy. And it's just a picture of it. But when we walk into verse 25, it says, Methuselah lived 187 years and became the father of Lamech. And then Methuselah is an interesting cat, just so you know. He dies moment before the flood. He basically makes it to the flood. So Methuselah's probably helping Noah build the ark. And the reason I say probably, because it's not saying Methuselah held the hammers. It does. But if he's still alive and this is his relative, I'm sure he's hanging out. And I'm sure Lamech did the similar thing, but Lamech died a little bit earlier than he did. But he says he lives, listen, 969 years. And I'm kind of with Luther. I don't know what to do after 100. What hobbies did he have? That's a long time. And I understand the flood set off a bunch of catastrophic events after the flood. As a matter of fact, people that say there's global warming, who I don't totally agree with, but there was a flood which set off a cataclysma of different weather events. And the reason I don't believe in global warming is because when God's done, he's going to heat this place. That's the global warming I believe in. So, but it's interesting to see this because when we talk about building the ark, it was quite a project. Now, I believe Noah was like everybody else at that time. He was pretty much an agricultural guy. He was building and substituting farms because that's what they did. That's what they did. That was their livelihood. We don't have a real record of when they started eating meat until after the flood. So, and I don't know if I'd want to live before the flood because what's for lunch? Plants. What's for dinner? Plants. What's for breakfast the next morning? Plants. After a few minutes, I'm going, I guess we're having plants. Oh, no. You can have a side of fruit. It's like, okay. But that's what they did have. I want you to go back for a second to 5:6. 5:6, Genesis 5:6. And I want you to notice something else. Seth lived 105 years, and he became the father. And because we're going through these kids that Seth had, and grandkids and so on and so forth, and we're going to narrow it down to one, a guy named Noah. What about the rest of the world? It's not part of what God wanted to know. But the rest of the world was going crazy. Unchecked sin nature. And we'll talk about that as we go through this section. And I believe that's paradigm for the flood was when Enoch walked with God and he was no more. That was his escape plan from the flood. He got out of that area, wherever it might be, and avoided the flood. So I want to give you some pre-thoughts. And it's so I'm good. Okay? First of all, God is angry with people of the entire world and pronounces judgment beforehand. So you know about God's judgment. He warns and warns and warns. He just doesn't come up with an arbitrary judgment. So when people say today such and such is a judgment, I go, can you find it in the Bible? Because God will tell people there's a judgment and it's coming. Duck. And here's what's going on. Here's the words that are involved here. God won't strive with man long. He was grieved by man because there's wickedness and corruption. Now, I know most of you are thinking, I know, I can read minds. Sounds like today. Doesn't sound much different from today. God's striving with the craziness of mankind. We see all sorts of corruption and wickedness in the world. And I would say this, you're probably right. I don't know which one's doing it. So just in case. Sure, throw things. Get rid of this. But, see, I can just deal with the noise. I won't give that one to Mike. Now it sounds louder, right? Goodness gracious. Wow, it's like an echo chamber up here. Throw these things away. Okay. I feel better. So that's what's going on. You may have to lower me a little bit here because I feel like I'm yelling at myself. Oh. Secondly, we will see man was seeking God. If you look at mankind, what did you just totally shut it off? Now everybody's saying, test. So we will see that man was in no way seeking God. We won't see anything in this chapter where anybody's seeking God. Even Noah, it's kind of interesting, the verse we will see what happens, but I don't know how much he was seeking. The text doesn't say it. Remember, we're trying to stay in the text. Thirdly, man continued even after being told of judgment to continue life as normal. Life as normal is not always a good thing. Go up to somebody and say, how's things? Everything's normal. I got a normal life going on. But behind that, there's problems. Fourthly, from Noah's sons also came evil nations. So Noah gets off the boat. The first navy was Noah's navy. It was one boat in the fleet. And they get off this boat, and then they start propagating what? More evil nations. Because I know that. I look around today, and we have evil nations. Where'd they come from? That boat. People look at the ark and say, oh, it's great. It was, ark was a place of salvation. If they got in the boat, God shut the door and all that stuff. We all know the history of that. But what happens afterwards? We would think God flushed this world. And everything would be good after that because God only brought the good guys on the ship. The problem is good guys made more people with a sin nature. And that's what we have. So we have his sons, we have Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Now, don't somebody come up later and say, was that the first three stooges? Don't do that. They were interesting kids. And what we'll see from them is kind of fascinating. I think Mike's going to cover some of that as we deal with different things, but I'm going to focus on something a little different. Let me tell you something about Japheth for a minute. Japheth had sons, and they became nations, Gomer, Magog, which became the Turks, the Khazars, and the Chinese, and I think that's and the Slavs. So you just right away, you say, okay, there's a lot of great people in there, and a lot of Ham was the father of Cush, Mizraim, Put, which was Egypt. Then there's his son Canaan, so we know what that is, the Canaanites. Then he had a son, Cush, and that son had a guy named Nimrod, and Luther will cover that tomorrow with the Tower of Babel. They also had Kepher, which Kepher was basically the father of the Philistines. And I think they still may be around. Right now they're getting mortared and bombed kind of thing. Then also what came out of that, so I'm going to elaborate a little further. What also came out of Ham was the Canaanites, Sidonites, Cushites, Jezebites, Amorites, Gershites, Hivites, Arkites. I think it's funny. The Arkites came out of the ark. The Arvadites and the Hamathanites. Now, if you just look at the group, we already have issues because when Israel's told to go into the promised land, they got to get rid of what? All the Perizzites. Okay? And this is where they came from. Shem, he has his issues too. In his lineage is not only Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, which is fine, but also Ishmael comes from him. Midian, Zimran, Jokshan, Medium, Sheba, and Dedan, and they're all enemies of Israel. So everybody says, oh, the Shemites are really good. Well, sure, God used a stem of the Shemites to bring in Abraham, but the rest had issues. So what I did is I put this up here for you to memorize. So if you want a book, you got to memorize the chart of table of, I call it the 70 nations. But if you just look through these, it's fascinating how they all developed. And what you do see is a lot of people having a lot of kids. Okay? So everything was normal, and within the last I checked, the flood ends in chapter 9. Chapter 10 is some issues, and chapter 11 is the Tower of Babel. So it didn't take that long for everything to go back to chaos. And man never, well, I'll say it in a minute, so just hang on to that thought. Jesus, Syria, Noah. I'm just kind of trying to set the stage because I'm going to sit here in a few minutes, and I'm going to get on my soapbox. So I'm going to set the stage. Here's what Jesus says about the end times coming. He goes back to Noah. You want to know what the end times will be like? For the coming of the Son of Man will be just like the days of Noah. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. Know what it sounds like to me? Everything's normal, but it's not. And they did not understand until the flood came and took them away. So the coming of the Son of Man be. They won't understand. And I don't think it's not the idea of they won't understand. They don't care. Now, I don't know how well you guys are giving out the gospel, and you should be okay with that. You should be giving people the gospel. But does it sound like most people are starting to be indifferent to anything God? And that's kind of what we see. But they were marrying, given a marriage, and it's kind of interesting. It doesn't tell you what kind of marriage, does it? They were eating and drinking. Do you think that's normal? We just had lunch. Was that a normal activity? I know that was, but eat, right? So that's how I believe Jesus is saying everything's, all systems are go, everything's normal, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of apathy and indifference. So Noah had an ark, and building the ark condemned the world. Just think of the building project. I like personal building projects that get done like yesterday, okay? Right now I have a gentleman rebuilding part of my deck, and I keep looking out, and I said, that should be done already. Why is it taking so long? It's a project that's going on too long. And Liz will look at me and say, it's only been like 2 weeks. Chill. No, I want it done. He had a building project that took 100+ years. You say, well, all he had to do was go over to Home Depot and get the lumber, and they'll deliver for like $80. No, he had to go do all that stuff. He had to learn trades. And where did he get his skill saws from? Craftsman wasn't around yet. Or Hilti, right? Should say that. So here's what it says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. By faith, you know what Noah understood? He understood how God does things. So it says, by faith, understanding who God is, being warned by God about the things not yet seen, in reverence prepared an ark for the salvation of his household. He's out there pounding on the wood, knowing any moment he was going to get in, and God would condemn and destroy the world. And became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith. So he believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And that's part of what was going on here, and that's important. 2 Peter 2:5 says, and he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness. How's that? Noah's hammering and saying, I want to tell you about God. Because everybody's going to come out, right? What are you building? Most people don't live in a 7-story condo, and he's building this tremendous, we'll see later how big the ark is. And if you've gone to the Ark exhibit in Kentucky, you could, as you go through the arches to go in, you go, ooh, okay. But don't look at it, because that was a lot of Mennonites and other people building this thing, and huge cranes and everything. What did Noah have? He had 100 years to do it. And every day he says, on today's list, we're just making nails, kind of thing. He had to produce a lot of things. He had to put this thing together. And then he had a fun job. He had to pitch it. Now, he didn't throw it. He had to pitch it. I don't know if you guys ever done anything with tar. That's miserable. And Noah's going to bed, and he's going, I just got this stuff all over. How do I get this out of here? But here's what he was doing. He was building and preaching, telling them what it was about. And they were probably laughing at him. It wasn't probably a lot of fun. I don't know if you guys have ever seen one of the movies about Noah, and they had these big angelic-like creatures helping Noah. That didn't happen. But I believe Noah had a lot of sons, not just these 3 that were helping with the building project. This was a huge undertaking. He's building a massive vessel in the middle of nowhere, and it never rained, and it wasn't on the riverbank. Some people may have seen when they make a big ship, it's in the shipyard, and they push it, they hit it with a bottle of champagne, and they shove it out to sea, right? Noah didn't hit his with champagne, and when God raised the water, that brought it out to where it needed to go, okay? There's some crazy pictures in mythology that says, here's what the Noah's Ark looked like, and they have this big, tower, and the Ark is like, no, that doesn't work. Anybody knows anything about, we call it engineering dynamics, that thing would have just flipped over, and they would have been underneath. That's not how that works. God's design was purposely built that Noah could be in the roughest waters and be perfectly calm with the ship. And it was a ship. It was huge. And that's what he was doing. And when he brought, God brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. Please focus on these words, because this is part of, in a minute, when I'm going to get up onto my soapbox and kind of do certain things. But here's what I want you to remember. Even after God pronounces judgment and carries it out, man never seems to learn. Just think about it for a few minutes. Go up to somebody today and just say, listen, are you a believer? You know, God sent a flood to show you what he's going to judge. That he's going to do that again, but he's not going to judge it with water. He's going to do it a different way. Do you want to be part of that judgment? Oh, God didn't do that. That's a bunch of mythology. Sorry, it's not, because the Bible, what do we say at the beginning? Genesis is history. And I think we need to remember that. So, a couple of quick observations, and then I'm going to stand up. No, I'm not. I want you to think about it. First of all, this is the first time we are confronted with the sinfulness of man worldwide. Worldwide. I don't know if you guys realize this. Just think about it for a minute. When I was a kid, they said, you know, smiling is contagious. Smile. People smile with you. I said, that's pretty cool. I like being happy. I like joking around. And people do. I also noticed something else that's contagious, a yawn. Somebody will yawn and I want to take the nap, okay? But the most egregious contagion is people sinning and sinning egregiously. So when you look at the global situation, whatever it might be, you see sin off the chain. And I put in Romans chapter 3 because it's a reference. We're not going to go to all these references for sake of time. This is the first time we were introduced to God's grace. Now, Luther brought out God's grace in a basically a visual way, but it's not. This is the first time it actually says it. If you look at Genesis 6, verse 8, it says, but, listen, but, make that large, but Noah, in the face of everything going on, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. That word favor is grace. That's grace. So when somebody says today, to me, it kind of irritates me a little bit. We're living in the age of grace. That kind of sounds like there was no grace before Christ died. No. God has to always be graceful because he's always God. There's never a time God's not God or less God. So to tell me God never showed grace, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. And we saw that. He brought up Cain. I would have zapped Cain too. We have a Cain problem, you know. Thirdly, this is the first time we see God's judgment pronounced and then carried out. Yes, man died deaths, but we didn't really see that until we went to the record and saw them dying. But this is the first time God says, you know, I'm going to judge the world with water, and get ready. It's coming really soon. And gave man a time of grace to hear what's going on and happening. I think that's important. I also want to do this because this is preemptive strike. I want us to be people that can read the Bible. And that's what I've always said here. Please see what the text says. Let's be observant. The key words in chapter 6 are men and earth. That's the key words. The focus is on what man has done and what one man will do with his family. And it's always about the earth. It's not about Mars or Neptune or the sun. And when we talk about the flood, and we'll get to it, it has to do with this globe. This globe. Did you get that? Yeah. Okay, so let's go to Genesis chapter 6, 1 through 4. We're going to read through these verses, and we're going to work our way through some of these different things and try my best to get you to change your thoughts about different things. So Genesis 6:1 says, now, and that's an important word because this is a continuation of the narrative. And we see that a lot through Genesis. Even if you look through the 5 books of Moses, they're really not separate. You could think of those as different chapters in the same volume. Pentateuch is 5 books of Moses, but it's really one because in the Hebrew, they kind of connect. It's like you go from one to the other, from the other to the other, and they connect. The only one that doesn't really function as a connecting one is Deuteronomy because it's going back to say, by the way, did you get Leviticus first? Let's do it again, just in case. But here we got in Genesis 6:1. Now it came about when men began to multiply in the face of the land and daughters were born to them. So we understand what's going on, right? People are getting married and having what? Children, okay? Is that simple? Please be simple. That the sons of man saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whoever they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man. We can see that, right? Forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, the days shall be 120 years. And then it goes on, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Right? We're good so far? I hope your wheels are spinning, because right now I'm going to start to burn rubber. Okay? Who are they? What's going on here? What's going on here? And there is 5 viewpoints I'll give you, and only one is right. And I will allow you to choose after I annihilate the other 4. Okay? At least I'm being truthful. Viewpoint number 1. Well, first of all, viewpoints. That's what I want to talk about. Sons of God. Who are these people? I find this whole narrative very interesting because God's only telling us what he wants us to know and the children of Israel to know. So who are they? First one, let's get this out of the way because this is the one I grew up with. This is the one, and most of you, I'm looking around the room, probably have heard it and probably grew up with this one too. Angels procreated with women to produce powerful offspring. I was watching some yokel on TV telling us what these creatures look like. And I'm going, that's mythology. You're just pulling stuff out of mythology and shoving it in the Bible. Don't do that. We're staying in the text. Okay? I don't care what happens outside the text that looks like it could happen. He even went on to say that some supernatural being was having an affairs with animals. That's why we got the Minotaur and all these different things from. And I go, no, that's mythology. Keep it where it is. It's mythology. And I want to stay within the text as best I can. So it's in Hebrew, it's Ben-Ho Elohim. Ben-Ho Elohim. It can be sons, or children of God. It can be translated in various ways as that. Now, I'm going to say something because many of you have heard this before. So hang on with me because I'm going to take a few minutes to disseminate this and destroy it. Okay, I want to park the horse at some point. Okay. First of all, I've heard this. Let's go to Job and see what Job has to say about this passage because Job uses the same expression. The number one issue I have is you cannot use poetry to interpret history. That's a bad method of interpretation. Job is, if you don't know this, Job is poetry. I know it doesn't sound poetic because it is a historical account wrapped in poetry. So if you separate your books of your Bible, he's in the poetic section of the Bible. So it's very hard. And here's the interesting thing. What came first, Genesis or Job? And I'm going to be honest with you, I have no clue. But I think Genesis came first because it's first in every Bible. So when the Hebrew Bible was set up, it's laid out a little differently, but it's still the first book. Because it says Bereshit, in the beginning. In the beginning. I think that's important. Now, I'm going to just snuff this out for a minute. God can use words, yes or no? God is very good with words. He created language. When he spoke with Adam, Adam understood. Yes? No? God didn't have to say, hey, Adam, take about 10 years, learn a language. When Adam was created, God gave him a built-in understanding of language, and God communicated in language, and God didn't communicate in language to confuse. So ready for this? If it meant angels, God would have used the word angels. The word angels is used 196 times in the Old Testament. Not once do you see it here. So who are they? Well, and we'll get into that. But I want to kind of walk through this argument a little bit. So I believe most of this argumentation, like a lot of different things in the book of Genesis that come about over the last 200-300 years, are arguments of weakness. because they're not staying in the text. And they want something miraculous to going on or something really weird. I'm going to tell you a quick story. I loved baseball. I still love baseball. But as a kid, I played baseball anywhere, anytime, and I didn't care. So we, in my house, under the stairs of my utility room, we had jalousie glasses. You know, those little long jalousie glasses that would be replaced, because back then we had glass windows that were built like jalousie. So you had 30 of them to be a window. I had a ton of those because we broke a lot of them. My neighborhood, us kids, and we were stupid. We were playing baseball with a basketball one time, and you hit hard enough and far enough and hits his window in slow motion. It hits the top and it goes straight down, and every jalousie breaks. And we were very good at 11 and 12 years old. It'd take us 15 minutes. We would clean it up and replace all the glass. But we had to do something that was hard for an 11 or 12-year-old. We had to take personal responsibility for the damage. And I would be very angry at God if somebody else caused the damage and God destroyed all mankind. See where I'm going with that? And I think that's important for us to see. And what I'm saying is, when you see something, and my argument for these kind of things is, what happens is they start later in history, and so people start believing what's been propagated. And I think this theory came about late 300 AD. And the problem with that is it gets repeated because it's so unprecedented. They repeat it, and you repeat things often enough, everybody starts believing it. And it sounds great in that idea. But let's just look at Hebrews 1:5 real quick. I think this is a place to go with this. First of all, this is what it says. For to which of the angels did God ever say, thou art my son? So when we look at the terminology, sons of God, what angel did he ever call a son? Curious. Today I've begotten thee. Now, obviously, he's talking about Christ, but it's still the same idea there. And again, he says, I will be a father to him, and he shall be a son to me. So therefore, sons of God are not angels, because no text everywhere, anywhere at all, except this one that's used for this, promotes that understanding or advances it. And we have to be students of what it says, to whom it's being said. If this was the children of Israel in the wilderness, and Moses wrote this like this, what would they have understood? Would they have understood it as some intermingle of angels? Has that ever really happened? I know, listen, I played back to baseball. I played baseball in my first year out of high school. It was American Legion Baseball, and I had two guys on my team. And I played between Angel, and Jesus. And I didn't think for 1 minute either one of them was an angel or Jesus. Okay? Because we look at things, and the reason I'm bringing this up, we equate things with certain ideas. And we're going to have to walk through this and kind of be as understanding as we have. So basically, believers today are referred to as sons of God by the spirit of adoption. And I think that's important, again, as we go through this, to see that. And remember that. So what I'm just doing is going through this one idea. Job 1:3. 6 and verses 2 through 1 uses this idea. So Job, again, poetry. Job was the greatest of all men in the East. Then all the sons of the East. So basically talks about sons. Job is a son. He's a man. He's a son. And then what happens? Not sure what's going on here. I remind you, Job is poetic. What it says, all the sons of God came together. And when they came together, Lucifer showed up. So everybody automatically thinks it's an angelic conference. Where does it say that? Because if to do that, we have to interject into that text. He's talking about angels. But it doesn't really say it, does it? Thirdly, Job was a man of God and thus one of the sons of God. Was he and other believers gathered together to worship? And Satan showed up, Lucifer? That's a really good option, isn't it? I would think it's a good option. What was Job was a man of God. According to Job, the first chapter, he was the most righteous of all the people at that time. Fourthly, they were to present themselves is used often of presenting oneself before a monarch. Normally implies deep respect and is often used with the idea of readiness for service. The sons of God presented themselves before the Lord for service. We always think it was a physical presentation. God was there and these guys showed up. How about Satan roams this earth? I think that was already set up in what chapter? Chapter 3. Wasn't he the serpent? Did he ever not have free access to being on this terra firma? So he showed up at a worship service. Does he show up at a worship service today? Let's not go there. So here's my main problems. Why did a just God judge the human race for something purely satanic? And it's not angelic. Let's stop for a minute. Let's back up for a second. If it was angels, I'd have a super problem. But we're going to interject into there, it's fallen angels. How would you get that out of that? And why would God allow fallen angels to go do something that they can't do? God gave man and woman the idea of being fruitful and multiplying, yes? Did he ever say that to an angel? Can you find any verse that says angels can be fruitful and multiply? You guys aren't going to throw one at me? So you must not know. Secondly, Jesus, when dealing with Noah's time, Noah's time, stated everything was normal. The people at that time were unprepared for the flood, never mentioning any angelic sin whatsoever of any sorts. Wouldn't Jesus have normally said, hey, by the way, what happened then with angels and corrupting mankind, it's going to happen again in the future? No, because it never happened. Jesus wasn't just silent about it and ignored it or skipped over it because it didn't happen. Sorry. Remember, I'm on my soapbox. Also, 2 Peter 2:4. Well, let's just do this. Let's go to 2 Peter real quick. Because these are usually the proof texts they go to that support this idea of angelic beings interacting with mankind. And they usually go to 2 Peter 2:4. Let's kind of find out what's going on in 2 Peter and get an idea of what's going on. And I'm going to just jump into 2:4 to set the stage. It says, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to the pits of darkness reserved for judgment. What was the sin of angels? Somebody give it to me. There was only one sin ever in the Bible that they did. They fell. Right? Other than that, we're going to make them, interject them into Genesis 6, which it doesn't say. And they are going to be punished and cast in. I read Revelation 20. They're already, and remember, God says things as if they're already done. We've already kind of said that. With Luther said that when he went to Revelation. God is a God of history. He is the only one, ready for this? He is the only one ever that can be able to use the future indicative. What that means is something's going to happen as a historical fact in the future. Now, I'm going to look at all of you and I'm going to say this. After the second time, when Mike's done, you all are going to go out and get ice cream. I'm not buying. And I'm just saying that's going to happen. And that means everybody's got to go do it now. And here's what's going to happen. I will tell you this. Most of you are going to forget. And most of you are going to say, I can't eat ice cream. And some of you say, my mom will never let me have ice cream before dinner. Okay? So not everybody's going to do it. But future, I'm telling you, everybody's going to go do it. I can prognosticate the future 100% wrong. Every time. I can. That's why I'm not a gambler. Never was. Because I don't like losing. Okay? But if you think about it, if God says a future event, has he ever been wrong? He is 100% on all prophecies. He's never wrong. And I think that's important. So when we look at Peter's talking about future judgment that's coming. Everything here is about false teachers who are teaching and they're awaiting judgment. And he's saying, here's the examples. In verse 5, he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a preacher of righteousness with 7 others. Does it say anything happened during that time? No, but we're connecting 4 and 5 like they're part of the same thing. They're not. They have nothing really to do with each other than examples of God, how God judges. Verse 6, he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to destruction by reducing them to ashes, rubble. We're not covering that in the conference, but that's another sign God judges. God said it, God did it. And that's how I look at it. So the whole race of Noah's time was ungodly. I'm good with that. And we see that. Just think about it for a minute. Just back up. Go to verse 4. Let's do something a little different. And just think this through. It says, if God did not spare angels. You know what another use of the word angels is? A messenger. There's a possibility here that when these messengers sinned, what messengers would ever sin? I was having fun the other day at my computer. I was watching this guy doing a thing on YouTube on the top 50 false teachers in the world. And I would say, God, you need to zap them. They're saying some awful things that are not biblical. Like one said, Christ went to hell to pay for your sin. What are you talking about? And I'm saying God has a special judgment. Yes, he does, and he will judge these messengers that are propagating false stuff. Now, that's a possibility. But I wouldn't read into this some fallen angels and what happened in Genesis into this. Look at verse 9, 2 Peter 2:9. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from temptation and to keep the unrighteous under punishment for the day of judgment. There's only two people in the world that he's dealing with here, Peter. The righteous, the godly, and the unrighteous. What is Noah dealing with? He is righteous, and God is dealing with the unrighteous of his time. Nothing else. Let's not belabor things that are not in the text. And as we look at this, go back to Genesis, and I'm going to say something as simple as I can, because at some point we need to move on. Otherwise, Mike is not teaching this afternoon. If you just read chapter 6, 1 through 4, just a normal reading of it, where would we see anything about angels unless we read into the text? Where do we see that intermarriage happening? And I'm going to say something. Well, let's just do this. Can angels reproduce? Okay. Well, we know from what Jesus says they can't. But I would say this, if they were fallen angels, do you think God would call them sons of God? Just think about it for a minute. That's a horrible term. Fallen angels, and they're my children. And somebody will say, well, God created the angels. Yes, but he didn't make them his sons. He made them angels. And at some point in history past, there was a group of them that decided to follow Lucifer because he had a really good idea. He wanted to be like God. And they said, that's cool, we'll go with you. So a third of the angels left to go follow. How much was that? I don't know. It was a lot. And we have this horrible understanding that comes out of this. So, and I would think it's really weird for God to allow his word to call fallen angels sons of God. I would be really upset. Okay? So when we talk about productive rights, the number one thing I find is they never received any mandate to be fruitful and to multiply. God did not give them a human body. And somebody will say, well, they took on a human body. What? Well, they took on human forms in the Bible, did they? Yeah. But I can't say that all of a sudden they became, be able to reproduce. And a friend of mine once said, well, what happened is angels came in and possessed a man. And therefore, these were possessed men that did that. I go, well, that's kind of really reading into the text, isn't that? That's eisegesis on steroids. And I just have a problem with that. Jude also brings up something like this. Well, let's just look at this. Therefore, if angels were fallen angels, I think sons of God is a strange and nefarious title, don't you? And that's kind of where I already kind of went through this. How about Jude chapter 1, which is only one chapter. Anyway, verses 5 to 6 says, but I want to remind you, though you once knew this, that the Lord, having saved people out of the land of Egypt afterward destroyed those who did not believe. So what is he talking about? The wilderness wandering. Aren't we talking about the children of Israel getting these book and they were wandering? And after the angels who did not keep their proper domain but left their own abode, what's he talking about? Oh, they slept with women and that's why the flood. No, he's talking about fallen angels. I don't know how hard that could be because they didn't keep their abode. Where was their abode? With God. They weren't to follow Lucifer. He's reserved in everlasting chains. In other words, at one point, they're going to be in darkness for the judgment of the great day. And we see that in Revelation 20 again. Then somebody will automatically go, well, what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities around them, in similar manner to these, having given themselves over to sexual immorality? It has nothing to do with angels. And I know some of you say, well, Lot had these guests and they tried to rape these angelic beings, but they didn't. Lot was an idiot. That was an idiot moment. And the Bible does call Lot the righteous one, but he's an idiot. Because instead of allowing them to do their sexual activity that they've been doing in these cities, he wanted to give them their daughters. That's horrible. I don't go to Lot and say, I can learn a lot from Lot. There's nothing there. So in Jude, when they use all these proof texts to support Genesis 6, they really don't work. And that's problematic in and of itself. Well, I'm not going to go on all that. There's nothing in Jude that states angels propagated with women. That's reading into the text, and we're trying to stay away from that idea of reading into the text. Let me read this. J. Vernon McGee. Anybody ever heard of J. Vernon McGee? And most of you swore by J. Vernon McGee, right? Here's what he says. The matter of sons of God and daughters of men is something that has caused no end of discussion. That's why we're doing this afternoon. There are a great many good men who take the position that the sons of God were angels. I personally cannot accept that at all. Me too. Most of my teachers taught that the sons of God were angels. Me too. And I recognize that a great many of present-day expositors take the same position, and they're wrong. Oh, I added that. However, I cannot accept that view because if these were good angels, they would not commit this sin, and evil angels could never be designated as the sons of God. See, Jay kept it simple, stupid. Also, the offspring were men. They were not monstrosities. Well, there was giants in the land. Well, there was giant. I don't know about you all. Goliath was a pretty big dude, right? King Saul was a pretty big dude. I think King David was a pretty, Jews don't have a basketball team today because I happen to be like one of the tallest Jews I know. Okay. And we ain't playing basketball, but back then they were big people. I don't know what happened in the gene pool. I got ripped off. The only thing I feel great about is I'm 4 inches taller than my dad. If he were alive, I'd still be standing over him. Yeah, Dad. And you've seen my mom. She's like the tallest person in the room, right? My mom says I'm 5 foot. I go, you're begging to be 5 foot. You're like 4'10". So if these were good angels, they could not commit this sin, and evil angels could never be designated as sons of God, and the offspring were men. They were not monstrosities. I do not know why it is assumed by so many, the offspring were giants. Just stop that. Quit trying to reach out to something mystical. I was once told by somebody, Eric, you don't want to be mystical a little bit. You don't want to reach out and have a little of that imagination. No, I don't. That's good. I want to be biblical. What does it say? Because I think it's important for us to say. So viewpoint number 2. Took all that time to get to point number 2. Mike, if you're on by 3 o'clock, you'll be fine. Mike's back there going, he needs to get done. I got so much stuff I want to regurgitate on everybody. Viewpoint number 2. The godly line of Seth tempted to intermarry with the ungodly line of Cain. That kind of works, but it doesn't really. Because here's what we're going to look at. Go to Genesis chapter 4. Our esteemed Dr. Smith kind of did this last hour. I just want you to see something here. So if you were to do this, you already see the line of Cain from verse 16 through 24. But then it goes into the line of Seth. So we have the line of Cain. I don't know if you know this. Line of Cain had lots of kids. Were they good or bad? No clue. We're just assuming Cain was awful and he had awful kids. That's like saying you're a really good person. All your kids will be successful and wonderful believers. If you believe that, that's problematic. Because when you have a bad kid, you're going to say, I must not have been a good parent. There's something wrong with me as a parent. Therefore, I must not be a believer, right? Because all of us want kids that are more angelic than we are, okay? Then we get to Seth in verse 25, and Adam had relations with his wife again. And again, it's narrowed down. I'm sure, listen, I'm supremely positive Adam didn't have 3 sons and that's it. Just think it through for a minute. Somebody always asks me, where did Cain get his wife? It's his sister. How do you know that? Well, what else does he? He didn't call Russia for a mail order bride. I mean, what are you talking about? There was Adam and Eve, and he lived 930 years. You know, we talk about the song, many sons had Father Abraham, many sons had Father Abraham. You know something? Adam was better. Many, many, many sons had Adam. Many, many, many sons had Adam. And daughters. And when it says it, I like the loophole it puts in there in chapter 5. All of these had sons and daughters. How many? Lots. We know because when we get to Genesis 6, God's going to destroy the world, and there's probably about 18 million people. If you do the mathematical formula, there's a lot of people. It wasn't like, okay, God brought a flood and 12 people died. It was catastrophic. So again, the problem I have with this viewpoint, the number one problem I have with it is you've got to add a lot of words in there, in my opinion, to arrive at this. Does it fit? Yeah, it kind of fits because we see what's happening in Genesis 5 with Cain and with Seth. But I can't prove everybody from Seth's line was godly, nor can I prove everybody from Cain's line was ungodly. That's reading a lot into the text. And I can't prove Seth had these great-looking guys, and they decided to marry the dolls of Cain. You know, it's kind of like, what are you talking about? I can't make that actually work. And I do want you to know something. We can't always figure out everything in the Bible, and sometimes we just got to say, whatever. I do know that Noah will find favor in the eyes of God. I don't know if anybody else did at that time. Well, they entered this ark of safety, the 3 sons and the wife. Well, yeah, but it doesn't say personally they did. And when we get to Romans chapter 8, verse 14 and 19, I'm not going there because of time. This refers to New Testament believers that are called the sons of God. Other terms used in the Bible to talk about believers and those who had a relationship with God are children of God. And I'm going to say something. It's the most difficult and egregious thing to me if you take one verse in the Bible and build a whole theological system around it. That's problematic in and of itself. And I would love it to be the line of Cain and the line of Seth because that kind of sells. And that's where a lot of Jewish expositors sit. They sit there and they say, that's what it's about. And the bottom line, though, of this viewpoint is God throughout Scripture warns against marriage between believers and unbelievers. Was that what's going on? Possibly. I don't know if it was Seth and Cain, but there was a lot of believers and a lot of unbelievers at that time. But we know by the time the flood comes, there's really one family. The end result is, as Moses puts it in Genesis 6:5, the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and he was grieved in his heart. Man was horrible. Do I think unequally yoked marriages result in this type of wickedness? Possibly. So I would put this viewpoint under possibility. But to blame marriage for the wickedness of man, listen, to blame marriage on the wickedness of man, that's horrible understanding. Because some people are married and not believers and have a good, successful marriage that some believers should exemplify. And I think believers really have no reason not to, because we're both wife and husband are supposed to be growing in godliness and the same place we want to arrive together at some point. Third viewpoint. There was an ungodly dynastic rulers who married women. In other words, upper-class men with lower-class women. And you probably have seen that in some of these wonderful shows around that, I can't marry you because you're not royalty. And they come out a lot this time of the year. They're called Hallmark movies. And some royal guy's acting like he's, visiting suburbia, and he's really the prince of Narnia or something, and he falls in love with some school teacher, and he knows, I can't marry her because she's not royalty. What? And someone's always in a... As one commentator put it, demons dwelt or at least controlled these men. What's the proof for that? And I believe this is a compromised viewpoint. Yes, in ancient literature, kings were referred to as sons of God. Yes, that's true. But the Bible doesn't. The Bible doesn't. That's what we're looking at, right? Shamash, which is a Hebrew commentary, says this: the Torah begins the narrative of the tragedy by speaking of the subjugation of the weak by the powerful, translating the phrase Ben Elohim as sons of rulers, sons of princes, or sons of judges. The lower class then did not have the power to resist their superiors. And it kind of like sells, right? Because what could the beautiful women. Now, I'm going to say something. I think beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Because I see marriages in Hollywood, and I said, how did she marry him? Somebody's blind. And somebody will always come up, love is blind. And I just say, we need to stop. Because everybody was getting married. It was a miserable thing that was going on. It's interesting, chapter 1, about this chapter, verse 1, our chapter begins with an account of mankind's quickening descent into the abyss. That's all we have in verse 1. How fast can man go whoosh? Now, I'm going to say something. I said this in first class. Genesis covers about 2,300 years. How long did it take man to become absolutely horrific? Not long. Not long. And since the flood, we've had exponential amount of time to get what? Better? I had a friend a long time ago that was an amillennialist. He said, we're going to usher the kingdom in. How's that working for you now? We're so much better than we were when I was a kid. Well, I grew up with, I love Lucy, and Lucy loves me, and they both slept in twin beds. Remember that? And Desi always had a foot on the ground like he was ready to run back to Havana. Okay? What do we see now? Oh, things are so much better. No, we went to color and ruined everything. Just me thinking. Viewpoint number 5. And this is what I'm sticking with. Okay? No, I skipped one. Okay, viewpoint number 4. This is even better. This is this is it. This is viewpoint number 4. And I like this because the Notes on Genesis by Albertus Peters says this in page 116. What does he, Moses, mean? Talking about Genesis 6, 1 through 3. I don't know. I like that. And I do not believe anyone knows. So far as I'm concerned, the passage is unintelligible. That's a guy that gave it a lot of work and thought. It's difficult. I'm going to make the difficulty as simple as possible. And I'll probably be wrong, and afterwards you can fry me on an open flame, okay? Viewpoint number 5, it's mine, and I'm sticking to it. My viewpoint. Everything was going on as normal, yet man was godless and corrupt. Take the blame, guys. You stink at being a believer in God. You stink at being godly. You're just horrible. Because good people do get married, and they go to hell. Marriage doesn't save anybody. Living life normal doesn't save anybody. People were not caring about God. They were apathetic. I bet you when the water was about up to here, people were saying, maybe Noah's right. Maybe. Water got to here. He could be right. Why is that ship floating? Where's it going? When the water got here and they're doing... Now, I don't think that's what happened. I think it came so fast it just washed everything out like a flushing toilet. They were saying, hey, can we get in? It's too late, baby. It's all over now. How long can you tread water? That's it. It's over. So let's do it like this and look at it. Everything was normal. Jesus even calls it, we looked at this at the beginning, things were normal. They were warned to judgment and didn't care. Here's what I put down. Reason for the flood. Ready for this? Let's talk about the flood. Why did God send a flood? Because of angels. I have issues with that. The reason for the flood is mankind was violently wicked. The earth was corrupt in the sight of God, and the earth was filled with violence. You know where I got that from? Genesis 6:11. That's the reason for the flood. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every intent of his thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Where'd I get that from? Genesis chapter 6. The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. Who's them? Angels. No. Men. I am about to destroy them from the earth. How many angels were drowned in the flood? It's a very simple theological answer. 0. You think an angel could drown? I don't know. I think they just back to wherever they came from, don't you think? And then the problem would what? Happen again. Anybody run into an angel wanting to go on a date lately? Now, some of you guys may have dated some women and you say, yeah, she was an angel. You should have seen her. That's a lie, too. You didn't get to know her. Getting to know you. It also goes on, the wicked violence of men is a biblical reason for the flood. No other reason is given in the text. Aren't we supposed to be people in the text? And I think that's important. So I put back in David L. Cooper how to read the text, but we don't need to do that. Okay, I'm going to give you something. It's because I'm supposed to be going Genesis 6, 7, 8, and 9. So this is my attempt at getting the rest. I have 29 slides I've done. I've got 10 left or 12 left, something like that. So this is the dimensions of the ark that God had given him. I'm not going to go through, what's a cubit from here to here. But since I'm a little guy, it's got to be bigger than that, okay? That's what a cubit was. But think, it's like the size of almost 2 football fields. It had at least, if you go 10 feet of floor, it had probably 5 floors, right? Because average, now if they're 9'4", they just duck a little bit. I'm a logistics guy, and we had a couple engineers in the class before that were sitting here, and then we got one standing in the back. I like logistics. And I said to myself, how'd they bring food on? How much did it take of water? Where were the facilities like? I mean, when Noah said to his kids, go use the bathroom, what part of the ark was that in? Or was it just a bucket? There's so many things going on that the Bible doesn't tell us. But here's the interesting thing. The Bible does tell us it's made of gopher wood. Now, I've looked out in Tulsa, and we have some beautiful trees. I don't know what gopher wood is, but I know how it got its name. Because Noah kept telling his sons, gopher wood! We need more. Go for wood. I know it's a bad joke, but it kept you guys awake for 5 seconds. So what I want to do is just give you an outline of the flood, and then we're going to go through a few more things, and then we're kind of done. So the outline of the flood, basically, we have the reason for the flood. The rest, I like this. I put it in here purposely because I like to be a little Baptist once in a while, so I force an outline. We have the recipe for the ark. How do you put it together? Kind of idea. Rain brings them into the ark. Remembering Noah in what? I don't know what New York is. I must have been voice speaking, and somebody said, "Where are you from?" New York. Wow, that's pretty funny. It's remembering Noah in the ark, just so you know. So I guess when I say in the ark, it says New York. I don't know. Removing the covering of the ark, remembering God. And then the covenant at the end with Noah, and we'll go through that in a minute. So in less than 30 minutes, which should be less than 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about what causes the judgment, God's grace in light of judgment, and Noah's covenant. Real quickly, what causes judgment? God's judgment, and it's simply this. And I want to just bring this up because somebody's going to inevitably say, "What about the Nephilim?" Ready for this? I don't care. Nephilim is an untranslated Hebrew word. And the word "im" means many of them. What are they? We get the word giants from a Greek translation, gigantus. They were big people. And it says they were Nephilim before and after the flood. So it can't be angelic offspring because that's just redunculous, the whole thing. We do know that These people had 120 years of God's grace to believe, and they did not. They were fallen on the earth before and after. And we could just say that, oh, the idea of Nephilim is fallen ones. Is that angels? How about man is fallen? Didn't Dr. Smith say something about our fallenness? And that's why we discussed the fall in chapter 3. And I think the Nephilim is just another name for men were fallen. And guess what? Men are still fallen. So who caused other, and what I think they did is they were so egregious, they caused others to follow them and be egregious. It continues that the hearts of those who saw them fell in amazement at their size. That's what it says in other parts of Scripture. But it could also refer that they were skillful, excellent, even noble. So the word has many shapes to it. The point is, Nephilim is a pretty obscure word. There's not a whole lot of information we have on it. And I will say this, don't build your theology on a word that's used a couple of times. 2 times here in Genesis and once in Numbers 33, which I don't think is related to anything that has to do with Genesis chapter 6. I think that's important for us to say that to this. Can this be used to refer to man's sin nature? Possibly. They were mighty men of renown. Again, that's what it says by the time we get to Genesis 6:4 at the end of the verse. It says they were mighty men who were of old, men of renown. And that's just what we get about it. Trying to see which part I'm going to skip to. But here's the point. What caused God's judgment? Let's blame it on who the Bible blames it on. Verse 5 says this, and the Lord saw the wickedness of man was great in Florida. How about California? How about on the Gaza Strip? No, it says on the earth. So again, we have those 2 words playing with each other throughout the whole Bible, man and the earth. And I think that's important for us to see that. Let's talk about God's grace in light of coming judgment. God reaches out to Noah in verse 8 of chapter 6. He says, but Noah found favor in the eyes of God. He also said in there, so it's interesting when we talk about God pronouncing judgment. At that time, when he pronounces judgment, he also extends grace. God has pronounced judgment on this world. It's coming. I read it and we taught it in Matthew. Christ is coming again, and when he comes again, there's judgment coming with him. Men have been warned, but they won't take the escape clause. The ark of safety today is in Christ. And men have not taken that warning. God is going to judge the world again, and for more than 3,000 years, they have been allowed to find grace, and they have not. God has offered it to them. In Noah's time, we know they had about 100, 120 years, depends on how you look at it, and Noah built and preached, but nobody responded. Last one, let's rim back the rainbow. There was a covenant God makes with Noah, and I think this is an interesting covenant. Look at chapter 6, verse 18. It says, but I will establish my covenant with you. You shall enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. So God's going to establish a judgment that he's going to have with them. And the sign of the covenant will be in chapter 8, verse 15. Part of it. Then God spoke to Noah saying, go out of the ark, you and your sons and your wives and your sons' wives, bring with you every living flesh, and goes on and so forth. I want to go to 9:8, because I'm running out of time. So then God spoke to Noah and his sons, saying, now behold, I myself established my covenant with you. So it was not only to Noah, but Noah's descendants, not only his immediate descendants, but your descendants after you, and with every living creature. Wow, do we have a sign of a covenant? The cattle and every beast of the earth and all that comes out of the ark, every beast. I will establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be cut off by water or flood, neither shall there ever again be a flood to destroy the earth. That's a good argument for what kind of flood? Local? If it's a local flood, God lied. Right? He said, I'm never going to do that again, and we get local floods all the time. It's got to be a global flood. Verse 12, and God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I'm making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for every successive generation. I will set my rainbow, my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and who? He says, me and the earth. I'm not going to destroy the world like that anymore, but he's coming back to destroy it with fire. And the judgment that we can look at will be even greater than it was before. So I'm going to flash through a couple of things real quick because I know we're running out of time. So when we talk about global judgment, it will be by fire, and it's important to see that. I'm going to run through two flood facts. First of all, the flood was global, not a local, as some would have you believe. A local flood would basically say God is a liar. The promise in the covenant with Noah is an everlasting covenant. This covenant was established with not only Noah and every living creature, but, and God himself, capital G. And we say every successive generation, never again shall water become a flood to destroy all flesh. Okay? Number two, the flood sets the stage for a greater judgment. God says, I am going to judge the earth. Did he say he's going to judge the earth with Noah in the flood? Yes. Did he do it? Yes. Quick questions that I'm going to ask you, 3 questions for you to go do some research. And on Sunday, you can ask us questions. How many times is Noah's name used in Scripture, and how does the Word of God represent him? It's kind of an interesting question, right? Because Noah's got fame just in one verse. One set of verses we look up, but it's more than that. Secondly, write down observations of what mankind was like in the time of Noah. Take a few minutes and say, what was it like? Explore some of those words. How does that compare with the nation of Israel, the people of the time of Christ, and that of the coming tribulation? Can we make any correlations to today? And most of you say, oh, yeah. But write them down. Kind of fascinating. Ready for this? Who are the Nephilim of Genesis 6:4? I purposely didn't go in depth in it because I wanted you to do some research on your own. So I'm going to give the rest of my time to Mike. No, I'm ending 10 minutes, and Mike will start at 3 o'clock. And I know many of you have a ton of different things to ask about this. But I want you to think through Scripture. What saith the Lord? Father God, we thank you for this wonderful time as we're looking at this great book of Genesis, the beginnings of everything. And as we, again, grasp the nuances, help us to grow in a understanding of the worldview through your eyes, that we can see what you're doing with this world, how you're doing it, and that your word is what we have to stand upon. Father, as I turn this pulpit over to Mike, bless him, give him the calm and peace that he needs to present his material. In Jesus' name, amen. You may be dismissed for 10 minutes.